So, hello everyone. My name is Evan Varation, and I'm the coordinator of the Clarence School District Family Support Center. And we're here today with Dr. Greg Fabiano, who is going to be presenting in the fourth part of our four-part series. So, this will be the last of the series of supporting little learners that we've been putting on. And this particular event is going to focus specifically on kindergarten, along with some other strategies, obviously peppered in here and there. So thanks to those who are attending live. And then as we did with the previous three and other sessions that we have put on, we will have this recorded and put it on the district's YouTube page. And we will also have it on our website. So for those that are on right now, I'll put that in our chat. And you can click on those links. There's also podcasts. There's a podcast with Dr. Fabiano as well, talking about kindergarten and a lot of other topics as well, and many other folks, community organizations that we've been able to sit down and have some great conversations with. So this will be, like I said, the last of this series. We do have one more education event before the end of the school year, and that's going to be next Tuesday, May 23rd from 6 to 7. And it's going to be for mental health for athletes. So it's going to focus on kind of help athletes cope with injuries, cope with struggles with performance, and really as a parent or as a coach, how to get the most out of your athlete and be an advocate and not an adversary, and help support them in their growth and process, especially as it relates to their mental health. So with that being said, if you want to join next week, there is registration on our Twitter page and our Facebook page that you can access. But other than that, we'll leave it to Dr. Fabiano to get us going.
Well, thanks a lot for the invitation to come and speak again. I'm going to talk about a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. That's the school entry of kindergartners and how to help them really embark on their school career in a really positive, promising, optimistic way. Before we look forward, we should look back and think about, where does kindergarten come from? And it literally means in German, children in the garden. And it was created as a way to transition to formal school in a way that would be developmentally sensitive, that would be really nurturing, and would allow the wide variety of behaviors that anybody that's ever been in a kindergarten classroom knows are present, that kind of sort themselves out over the course of a year in a way that didn't make the children start to dislike school, but also allowed them to start to become a little more independent from the homes that they were coming from, and start school on a really positive foot. Early kindergarten was completely at the children's pace. There was lots of opportunities for self-direction. You might suppose that it looked like maybe what some 3-year-old preschool classes look like nowadays, and I think, as we'll talk about, the demands in kindergarten have greatly increased. They're different than maybe what they were when it was first invented, but it was a really nurturing, kind, fun environment for children as they started school. Now let's contrast that with contemporary kindergarten classrooms. We know that there's a lot more teacher direction in classrooms these days. The academic expectations have trickled down from the higher grades, and it's not uncommon now for there to be some expectations that children will be entering kindergarten, knowing some sounds and letters, being able to do things like write their name, be able to follow lots of directions. And because of that, self-direction to some degree is reduced. There's more structured activities. There's more lines that kids are asked to get in. There's more activities that they're doing on a schedule. And when we think about the varied strengths and weaknesses that all kids enter school with, and that the variation is much greater at the younger grades than it is as we get into older elementary school age kids, middle school age kids, high school age kids, we can not maybe be surprised that there's some friction when kids enter kindergarten, and we're asking them to do a lot of tasks that maybe they don't have a lot of practice doing, and to some degree might not be developmentally ready to do because of their still young age. Unfortunately, we know if kindergarten is an unsuccessful experience for a child, there's all kinds of potentially negative outcomes. Grade retention being one. The evidence is pretty clear that repeating a grade doesn't have any positive effect on the child, and there are negative effects that outweigh that being a good choice for most kids. Getting tracked into more remedial placements, or having to have more pullouts from your class when maybe they're doing things you enjoy as a student, to do things that extra work that you might need to do to remediate academic deficits later. That's a negative from the point of view of some kids. And then, at least in New York State, kindergarten isn't mandatory. There are some places where kids are sent home from kindergarten frequently, and they miss out on all the good things that happen in that classroom over the course of the year. And then, unfortunately, just show up again to school in first grade, now not having the benefit that many of their classmates have had of having a really successful kindergarten year under their belt as they move to the next grade level. When we think about schools, I think we can probably all agree that the social, emotional, behavioral, and academic expectations are greater. There are larger class sizes. Now, betray to you how old I am by saying when I went to kindergarten, it was a half day. And so the kindergarten teacher taught a morning class of students and an afternoon class of students. And because the day was split in half, instead of a class size of 24 or 25, the teacher was teaching a class of 12 or 13 in the morning and then in the afternoon. I know that we also still had time to squeeze in a little nap or a rest, even in that half-day kindergarten class. And now think about today's contemporary classrooms. I haven't seen a rest time or a nap time in a long time in many of the classrooms as I travel around to schools. And then something we'll talk about today, an area that we've gotten really interested in our own work, is what's called the relative age effect, which we think may be a particularly risky area for the young for grade students in kindergarten. And so what is the relative age effect? This really relates to, in any context where you have a cutoff, you're going to have children that are born right before the cutoff, in which case they can go ahead and participate. And then you'll have children that are born right after the cutoff. They'll have to wait a whole nother year before they can participate again. And we see this quite often in sports. And this is a place where it's been really most studied. If any of you have any involvement with youth soccer or football or basketball, you'll have heard the terms like, I'm on an under 13 team, which means that before a particular birth date, you have to be 13. If you're turning 14 before that birth date, then you get bumped up to the next level. And what the evidence has shown is that those that are born right before or right after the cutoff, that are relatively older, they have some advantages compared to those that are born right before the cutoff, the relatively youngest. And when you think of it, this makes sense, right? If I am almost a whole calendar year older than somebody else that's in my group, I might be bigger, my cognitive abilities might be a bit sharper, my social skills might be a little slicker. I might be able to do a lot of things easier than somebody that's a year younger than me. And I don't know if any of you are interested in Malcolm Gladwell's books, but he has a really nice chapter about the relative age effect where he recounts how a hockey scout was at a game with his wife, and they were looking at the sports program, and the wife nudged him and said, "Did you notice anything about the birth dates of the players that are in this world championship game in Canada?" And almost 100% of them were born in January through March. And that made sense based on the Canada cutoffs that is December 31st. So if you were born January 1st, February, March, you were bigger, probably quicker. You got put on better teams with better coaches. You got more ice time because you were bigger, quicker. The people that were relatively younger maybe didn't get as much playing time. And over the lifetime of your sports career, you had more opportunity. Turns out that this happens in lots of places. If you look at medical school applications, you're likely to have a person applying to medical school who is relatively older in their state for their state's school cutoff for kindergarten. People who are relatively older in their class score higher on cognitive assessments. You're actually even more likely to be a chief executive officer of a Fortune 500 company if you're a relatively older kindergartner. But something I really like about that study showed that the Fortune 500 companies that made the most money had a relatively younger student as their CEO, maybe speaking to the scrappiness you have to develop over your lifetime if you're relatively younger to kind of keep up and catch up to some of those people that you're chasing who are relatively older. So when we think about kindergarten, there is some evidence that the young for the grade kids do have some risk factors. And when I talk to kindergarten educators, they readily say, oh, yes, we've known about this for years. We always have to keep an eye on those young kids. I mean, they come to us, they're not even 5 years old in New York State, and they're asked to go through a whole day in kindergarten. It's a long day for them. They have to do a lot of things. And so we're not surprised to hear you talk about that group as a group that has some challenges. When we look kind of across all the research, if you're a young for grade kindergartner, you are more likely to be held back. A parent or teacher might say they're too immature, they need another year. You're more likely to end up in with an IEP and in a more restrictive classroom setting. Teacher ratings rate you as more problematic, and you're more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD or even put on medication for ADHD just if you're relatively younger in your class. And I have this little chart here that shows maybe why this is happening. This is a test of phonemic awareness, the CTOP. And if you look to the far left side, so if you're 5 years old to 5.5 years old, in order to get a 50th percentile score, you only have to get 3 questions right. So if you get 3, if you have a raw score of 3, you're at the 50th percentile. If you're 6.5, you have to have a raw score of 8 to be at the 50th percentile. So within the same classroom, an educator would really have to be quickly flipping between expectations of how much academic work a child might be able to do in order to know if they're at the level we would expect, the 50th percentile. And now we all know this is not happening in most classrooms because that would be impossible for a kindergarten teacher to keep track of what the child's doing, what their chronological age is, what their own individual strengths and weaknesses are, and to do that in concert routinely every day across all the kids in our classroom is really a mission impossible. And so what probably happens is that teachers will, to some degree, rely on heuristics. Okay, this is a child in kindergarten, they're not able to do this. There are some other kids in the classroom that are able to do it. I think this child might be falling behind. When in fact, if we were looking at the CTOP, we would see that there would be a big difference in what would be expected as falling behind based on your chronological age. Then we also have this issue that goes on in districts across the country. Red shirting comes from a sports term where sometimes if a parent wanted their child to maybe get some advantages, get another year under their belt, get bigger and stronger, at the college age, their coach might say, we're not going to play you this year and give you just a chance to practice, and you're going to wear a red shirt to practice, which will tell us that you're not a player that's going to be playing in one of our upcoming games. You're just here for practice. Now, parents have done this with kindergarten. If they have a child in New York, for example, who has an October birthday or a November birthday, they might decide, you know what, we're not going to send our child to kindergarten next year if they have the privilege to be able to do that. Some families don't have that option. They need to send the child to school because daycare is really expensive or they don't have other caregivers that can help. But some families do that. Now, that might help their own child not be the relatively youngest kid in the classroom. But it does have a consequence for the relatively youngest child entering kindergarten that year, now having a kid who might be a whole year older in that kindergarten classroom, just expanding the frame of reference that the teacher is using to judge children's behavior. Further, we can think about COVID as a huge disruptor that could impact the relative age effect. So the kindergartners that are in school right now this year may have missed out on preschool. They missed out certainly on lots of community interactions that most young kids are part of because families were protecting their kids by keeping away from the store or relatives' houses or family functions. And we probably, at no other time in history, have had such a wide age range in most of our kindergarten classes than we do have right now due to the COVID disruption. So we know that children who are relatively young for the grade are at greater risk for being identified with ADHD. That's not surprising because the way we diagnose ADHD is a checklist that teachers and parents fill out about how frequently a behavior occurs and how much it's problematic. And every teacher that fills out a checklist is using as a frame of reference for whether this behavior is developmentally appropriate or not, all the other kids in the classroom. And so if we have a young for grade kid, there's a chance that we can have some mistakes made in the judgments about whether or not this behavior is developmentally appropriate or not, if the frame used for the reference includes older kids that have almost a year or sometimes more than a year head start on the child we're rating. When we started to get interested in this, we had a lot of conversations with administrators in schools and kindergarten teachers. And there's quite a bit of debate about, well, if this is an issue, when should we try to address it? Should we do it right away? If we know we have a young for grade student, should we do something to support them right away? Other educators said, I'm not sure that that's the right approach, that maybe we should wait, give the child a chance to be successful in the kindergarten classroom, and then, if needed, intervene by like the 20-week mark or something like that. And as I'll talk about at the end, we're doing a study to try to empirically figure out what is the right answer to that, because there did seem to be quite a bit of disagreement amongst our stakeholders we were talking to. So I'm going to show you a little quick video, if I can get it to pop up here. We need a musical interlude here to, so I'm switching this up.
Kindergarten is one of the first and most important developmental transitions experienced by a young child. Initially developed in the 1800s as a safe and nurturing place for children to develop freely through teacher guidance, it remains the entry point to formal schooling for nearly all children today. In today's kindergarten, there is no question that classrooms have changed. Activities are more teacher-directed, academic expectations have increased, teachers use more structured activities. This results in less allowance for developmental differences. Let's look at an example. Say we were growing flowers and we planted a seed in January, a seed in March, and a seed in October. There would be no question that there would be differences in size later. If we did not pay attention to how much time the seeds had to grow, we might judge the earlier planted flowers as better than the later planted flower. This is something we call the relative age effect. The relative age effect can cause problems for relatively younger children in kindergarten. Research shows that these relatively younger students, if compared to older students, are viewed as less proficient in kindergarten skills even though they are behaving appropriate for their age. This can result in a number of negative consequences for the child, including grade retention, referral to special education, being diagnosed with ADHD, and even being put on medication for ADHD. So what can we do? We can first understand that there are developmental differences present and judge the growth of each student using developmental norms rather than relative comparisons. We can also provide extra support and more attention and feedback to help the child make good progress during the kindergarten year. We are looking to partner with schools to help improve the kindergarten year for relatively younger students. Please contact us at the FIU Center for Children and Families of Western New York to learn more or share your ideas.
So I have just a few more slides here, and I'd be happy to talk about any questions or comments. This is kind of a logic model that we put together. Again, this is with a lot of collaboration with stakeholders, talking with parents of young for grade kids, talking with teachers who have been teaching in kindergartens for quite some time. And we do think that this is a potentially vulnerable group. The young for grade kindergartners may need some extra support. And we think there are two mechanisms at play that are important to address if we're going to really support these students. One is to help educators make more routine attributions that are based on correct developmental expectations, to not rely on this is my class and I have to make sure that everybody's meeting the same benchmark and keeping it up with one another, because that might not be practical or actually fair for a child who's young for the grade. They might need more time, or they might need a few intermediating steps put in place to help them learn the skills that will eventually get them to the end of the year benchmark. The other thing that we have a concern about is that the academic environment for a young for grade kindergartner is at risk for being a negative environment, that they're going to get more commands, demands, reprimands, corrective feedback, side glances, redirections, all of those things that children don't like to have happen to them. And if they get concentrated in the young for grade kids because they always need to hurry up or catch up or quiet down, school can become not the fun, nurturing place that we want it to be, particularly in kindergarten. And so positive behavioral supports have a real role in helping to boost the children who are young for the grade. I work with Larry Hawk, a clinical psychologist at the University of Buffalo, who's an expert on neurocognition, especially throughout development. And he even has hypothesized that if we can create this more nurturing environment, the rapid neurocognitive development that we expect in all kindergartners can actually maybe speed up in the young for grade kids and help them catch up. But we have to do our job as the adults in the environment to really set the stage for that to happen. And if we can be successful with that, we think that the children won't be rated as having as many behavioral challenges. They'll be more productive academically. And that in the long run, will reduce referrals for ADHD diagnoses or medication use that maybe wouldn't have to happen if the child was provided a supportive or nurturing enough environment early on to give them the gift of time to catch up to their classmates. Because as all of us know from working in educational settings, the difference between 4 years, 6 months old and 5 years, 6 months old might as well be decades, right? The difference between 9 and 10 is not near as pronounced. And so we can help keep them motivated and engaged and feeling positive about their progress early on. We give them the ability to hopefully catch up if needed. Now, that's not to say that there are not young for grade kids that should be referred for special education or may have ADHD concerns or do need extra outside supports. I think what our read of the research literature on is that maybe too many are getting referred for these things too fast. And maybe there are some other things in a multi-tiered system of support that we can do right away to offset some of these problems later on. So I told you we're doing a study. We are. And I think Clarence has even partnered with us on this. We're recruiting young for grade students, and they end up randomly assigned to one of three groups: a business as usual group, because we don't know if our intervention is any better than the good things skilled educators and school psychologists and parents are doing already. That's our comparison group. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have a right away intervention where we go out in the fall and over 6 meetings, they're brief meetings and they're no longer than about 15 minutes. The teacher watches a little video like the one I showed you about a particular skill that might be helpful for a young for grade student. And then they try it out during the next week before they meet again. And then the other group does that same thing, but it does it after the winter break. And we're trying to see if, number one, this approach helps. And number two, is there a particular time that seems to be the sweet spot for really supporting these students? Anybody that I'm always interested in ideas from people that come to talks like this. So sometimes people say, well, you're really missing a big thing. I'm always grateful for somebody telling me where we're going wrong or what we're missing. Also interested in learning about any thoughts people have about this and how it relates to their own work. So my email and my phone numbers there. I'm happy to talk with anybody anytime. And then we're also interested in talking with people in the community that are helping kindergartners be successful, not just with the relative age effect, but maybe in other ways as well. And this is an area our team is committed to working in because we think it's so important to start off on the right foot in school, and kindergarten is a place that should be filled of great memories and proud parents and proud kids. And anything we can do to help that happen, help make that happen, we want to do. So I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions or comments.
Greg?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Well, on the one slide, a couple of slides before this, there was something DRC. What does that stand for?
Oh, so that good question. And nice to see you. Thanks for attending the talk.
Oh, thanks. No, I'm happy to be.
I'm trying to see where. it was here. Oh, daily report card. So.
Oh, got it. Okay.
It's something we've used with elementary school kids for a long time. For kindergarten kids, we've adapted it a little bit. Many of the students we're working with can't read, so we can't list out some goals for them on a piece of paper or anything like that. So many of the for many of the kindergarten, young for grade kids, they'll have a goal of the day that they're working on, which might mean no more than 3 times where the teacher had to correct them to get back to their seat during a lesson, or sometimes it's sharing during free time with someone at least once, and the teacher noticing that. It's tailored to the child, and some of the kids, it's not targeting like the mid-afternoon tantrum that some of the kids have, where they the day's just too long for them and they start to get tired and melt down. So it's a daily tailored goal, and then the teacher and the parent provide some positive consequences for the child if they're successful in that goal. So to make it a more of a positive situation because the child's been successful, as opposed to a more problem-solving situation because the child has been unsuccessful.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
One more question for you. With all your experience, do you have an ideal age for when a child should be tested for ADHD? I sometimes talk to parents at Parent Network, and there seems to be a lot of confusion about when is an optimal time to have a young one tested.
Yeah, and there's a lot of clinical myths about that as well. What the research evidence shows is that you can reliably identify ADHD as soon as 3 years old if children are in a standard daycare or center-based school setting. Because the definition of ADHD is that the behaviors are developmentally inappropriate and they're happening at a level that's causing problems in daily life functioning. So if that's the standard, what's developmentally inappropriate in terms of hyperactivity, impulsivity, and attention at 3 or 4 years of age is actually quite remarkable, right? Because all 3 and 4 year olds are inattentive and overactive and impulsive. If you go into any preschool, you'll see plenty of that. And yet, there are some kids that stand out because they can't even do a little bit of what some of the other kids are capable of doing. I think a lot of providers are hesitant to assign a label at that young age, as I would be. And so in our work, we usually focus more on, is there impairment in daily life functioning? Is this child at risk of getting kicked out of a daycare because of their behavior? Or are they not making friends, or kids aren't wanting to play with them because of their behavior? Or they're not progressing and participating in the activities because of their behavior? Regardless of what we were to label that, I would say that those behaviors are things that warrant treatment. And so I would probably, many people might be uncomfortable with the label. I would not dispute that, but I would say that we wouldn't want to just watchfully wait that child as they fail through pre-K3, pre-K4, kindergarten, and then now in first grade, okay, now we'll say they're over 6 and we're willing to do something about it. Sorry, that's kind of a winding answer to your direct question.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Dr. Fabiano, my only question too would be, thinking about all of this, coming from the school perspective, what we're really discussing here is pretty large, in some cases, large scale systems shifts and perspective shifts as it relates to how we even approach these younger ages and how we approach what kindergarten should be. That's a pretty big lift. So on kind of the short-term end, if you're a kindergarten teacher watching this right now, or a parent of a kindergartner looking to either maybe advocate for their child or to kind of put together some things at home to support their child, what might be like 2 or 3 suggestions that are very basic, kind of like, hey, these are some things if you have some kids that seem to be struggling and maybe they are in fact younger relative to their peers in their class, what are maybe 2 or 3 things that for sure are just like best practice ways to address this that don't necessarily require a special education referral, that don't necessarily require, last week we had parent-child interaction therapy, or Monday, excuse me, that might not require as intensive of a support, which I would still argue that getting your kid into PCIT, if you're seeing any of these types of behaviors, probably still isn't a bad idea. What are a couple best practice strategies that either a parent or a teacher could use in their class?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say, I would start by saying nobody's a better judge of what's best for their kid than the parent. So really thinking about, okay, maybe I have a young further grade child, in New York, that child was born in November, October, September. I think a lot of parents, again, if they have the privilege to do so and they have a concern, they might hold that child back. I guess the one caution I would say about that is that you might gain something in kindergarten, but then if you fast forward 10 years, you might not want to be the parent of the first kid to drive in the high school class, or the first one to start dating and be the front runner for all of those things. So there's potentially some downstream consequences to that. So if a parent is in the situation you're talking about, where they have a young further grade student and they're going to be starting school, one thing that they can do is really support the child as much as is possible during preschool and then leading throughout kindergarten with things like, for example, shared book reading. The traditional way to read a book to a child is the parent holds the book, reads the words, the kid sits and listens. New contemporary approaches that have shown really remarkable improvements in early literacy skills include having a conversation about the book with the child, really using the book as a tool to have the child talk to you as the adult, and you as the adult to use more words to talk to the child. So you're still reading the book, but you stop and ask WH questions like, what do you think might happen next? Or who do you think is the person that did this? Or even ask them about some of their personal experiences to generate conversation. Like, do you remember the time we went to the store and we were shopping? What do you remember about that? That's something that all parents can do and can do more. It's free, right? It just costs you your time. But the more language that little kids use, the more equipped they are for our academic settings that they're going to be entering into. By the same token, we talked about positive behavioral supports used in the classroom. Parents can use those positive behavior supports at home. They can start to give the child some tasks or chores to do, small ones, right? Like maybe place the cups around the dinner table, or line up the shoes in the hallway. Those sorts of things help kids start to learn how to follow directions, because we know the second they hit the classroom, they're going to be peppered with directions all day long. Those are simple things that parents can do, but that maybe can help give their child a beginning of a scaffold to understand what's going to be expected of them in an academic setting. And then the last thing I would say is, no one's going to be a better advocate for the child than the parent. I would make an appointment with the kindergarten teacher and say, I think my child is a little immature in a few areas. Here are some things that we've noticed and some things we're working on. We want to partner with you this whole school year and support you 100%. And anything you suggest that we should do, we want to do that. And we'll follow through with that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that kind of speaks to, coming from our perspective as the Family Support Center, for anybody that's listening and watching this, whether it's using us as kind of a vehicle and liaison to facilitate those conversations, we're happy to do that. But we would also, just like Dr. Fabiano said, we would definitely encourage you as parents, especially early parents getting into kindergarten, first grade, second grade, to really develop those strong lines of communication with the school district. School and parent or family caregiver communication, in our opinion, at least from our Family Support Center perspective, it's part of the reason why we exist in our district, is because we feel, and the district feels, that making sure that there are strong lines of communication between families and the schools is one of the large indicators of that child's success. Just like Dr. Fabiano said, as a parent, you are going to know your child best. You know kind of how they developed before they got to school. You know maybe some experiences or even family history, whether it has to do with mental health needs or past trauma, that might be valuable for the school to understand, that might impact your child. And more importantly, most of the people within the school district at some capacity are going to be working with your child for an extended period of time. So whether that's your elementary school principal, whether that's the Family Support Center, whether that's the elementary school teacher that might be passing on that information grade to grade to grade, the more that they have an understanding of who you are as a parent, who your child is, and the dynamics that might be in play there, it's a lot easier for them to understand what supports are needed. It can be hard sometimes as a parent to pick up that phone or shoot that email and really open up that dialogue, set up a meeting, and vice versa. For a lot of our staff, it can be difficult. It's difficult to have a discussion about, something that maybe isn't going as well as you thought it was going to. But the longer that conversation is delayed, the harder it is and the more intensive supports that sometimes need to be put in place to correct that or to find ways to intervene. And so we would encourage you, and part of the reason we wanted to put on this series, so I want to thank Dr. Fabiano, as well as our friends from Best Self Behavioral Health, who put on some of the events in this series as well. Part of the reason we put this 4-part series on was because we know that addressing things at that early intervention stage, whether it's pre-K, kindergarten, elementary, is going to have lasting effects into their teen and even adult years. And that's going to, reap quite many rewards for those children as they get older. We have seen an influx in our office of referrals to our office from the elementary level. A big part of that, in my opinion, would be that we now have an elementary school counselor in every building. Please, as a parent, get to know who those counselors are. Those counselors are going to be, in addition to your child's teacher, your point people, especially as it relates to the social, emotional, and behavioral well-being of your children. So get to know those counselors. They're wonderful. They've done a phenomenal job in just a year of establishing relationships with all of our students. So in addition to getting to know them, feel free to contact us. And obviously, Dr. Fabiano put his information on this video as well. So if you are watching from afar via YouTube, thank you. And for those who attended, thank you. And Dr. Greg, thanks again for showing up.
Thanks for the invitation. It was a real delight.
All right. Take care, everyone.